أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا محمد بن عبد الله وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق وهو أصدق الصادقين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير لكم وعسى أن تحبوا شيئا وهو شر لكم. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. My respected elders, brothers, sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In our journey to awaken ourselves in a conscious fashion through introspection, we've arrived at this stage where we now realize that Allah has established two paths for us, or one path with two possibilities. That either we go towards Allah in a fashion where we are grateful, in a fashion where we appreciate and understand what He's done for us, and therefore we submit to Him, or we reject that every type of guidance that comes to us. Either we reject everything outright, or we're very selective in what we accept of this religion of Allah, and then there are certain parts which just don't sit right with me, so I begin to reject them. Allah tells us in the Quran, that's not how I want you to come to me. قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. I want you, but I want everything. God is not going to settle for second best. If you and I are going to submit ourselves to God, it has to be wholeheartedly that we surrender towards Him. In the same way as I created you, O man, where nothing was attached to you, when you return back to me, I want you to return in a fashion where nothing is attached to you either. That you will surrender at your last breath at least. Even if you had a rocky start, even in your life, you got attached, you detached, at the end of your life, you, oh man, have to be detached from everything. Otherwise, well then, adabun min ar-Rahman. It could possibly be that an individual who was a believer at some point in his life and then became a disbeliever, it's all about how he finished off. That's why one of the most important prayers for you and I to make is, oh Allah, make my end a good end. How many people have you seen that they were fighting against God, but then they opened their eyes and they moved to a station where now God accepted them. Even at the end of their life, God accepted them. And everything was forgiven. Have you not seen when somebody comes into our religion, into the religion of Allah rather, not ours, but into God's religion, and he becomes a Muslim? What do we say? Al-Islam yajubbu ma qabla. We tell him, don't worry, everything has been erased. By just saying these two sentences, by saying Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, that's it. Everything got erased. All the idols that you worship, yes, everything. All the prostration that you did to the idols, everything got worshipped because now you've submitted to God. Obviously, you have to show it in action for the rest of your life. The best of examples, I think, and the most practical amongst them is Shahr, is it not? Shahr, why? Because he was a man like you and I. A man who had sin on his shoulders. A man who had children, at least one child on the day of Ashura. A man who was married and had a spouse, who was attached to this dunya. And yet, the sentence this man says is a sentence that awakens you and me. Sometimes if you give an example of a prophet, it's easy to say, but he was infallible, he was guided by God, he could hear God, God spoke to him. This wasn't a man who was a prophet, this man had no miracle. Yet he stood in front of Hussein ibn Ali, ready to fight. In actual fact, the battle had already begun. When Shahr changed and when Shahr's eyes opened, this wasn't at the beginning of the battle. This wasn't before an arrow was shot. The battle had begun. People had been killed mercilessly. From the camp of Hussein, shuhada were already stacking up and walking into the gates of heaven. It was already being done. Yet this man goes into his tent and begins to tremble. And when men come to him, they say, "Oh Hur, if we were asked of the most courageous of men from Kufa, your name would have been at the top of our list. In what state do we see you?" And at that time he says, "I am making a decision between hell and heaven. And I will choose nothing over heaven. Because now there's been a wake-up call." He could have died. In my opinion, when Hussein alayhi salam asks Al-Abbas alayhi salam, he says, "Can you go to the enemy ranks and ask them for one more night? And tell them it's because we love to worship God." Undoubtedly, the words of the Imam would have been truthful. Yes, him and his companions loved to worship God, but they didn't need that one night. If they had died and if Ashura was on the day of the 9th, they too would have gone to heaven. But giving one more day was one more 24 hours period being given to anybody who stood opposite me, that maybe one person's eyes would open. That same Hur that had the fight taken place on 9th, we would have been cursing him. It's that same Hur that the fight took place on the 10th and you and I are praising him. Why? Because he was a man like you and me. He had vices, he had sins, he had attachments. But when death hovered in front of his eyes, he realized that this temporal world really doesn't mean much at all. Such awakening can come through different things. Sometimes you might see something that will change your life. You might bury somebody and that's it. You've been moved for the next 10 years. You might see your wife giving birth and you'll realize that, no, you know what? The only thing that I was certain of as I held this newborn baby in my hands, I didn't know if he could hear. I didn't know if he could see. I didn't know if she could taste. But the one thing, after 9 months of this child growing in the womb of my wife and the pangs of labor and birth that I saw, finally, I hold this child. The only certainty I have about this child is what? Is that a time will come when he will die. We speak about death as if it's so far away. Yet you add 50 years to everybody in this room and 50% have been buried on the scale of probability. You had 100 years and none of us are here on the scale of probability. And yet you know that you've lived 40 years already and how quickly that went. Another 40 years left maybe, possibly, maybe a bit more, a bit less. Doesn't it show that this death is literally just hovering over us? They're just waiting. Angel of death is waiting until your name or my name or his name is at the top of the list. And that's it. We return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You and I are looking for a call or something that will awaken us to make us realign ourselves on a regular basis. That call that Ibrahim gave to the birds to resurrect them. God, I want something like that. And Allah says that what better speech is there to resurrect you, O man, and your heart than the speech of God. That if you come to the Quran without a bias, I really want to emphasize this because sometimes we take off the lenses of one bias and I put on the lens of another. I'm going to give you an example. The Quran says in Surah Al-Isra 1782, وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And we send down from this Quran that which is a cure and a mercy for the believers. So for the believing group, this Quran is going to be a cure and mercy for them. As for the disbelievers, وَلَا يَزِيدُ الظَّالِمِينَ إِلَّا خَسَارًا. But for the disbelievers, for those that reject, this same Quran is only going to add to their loss. It doesn't say that this Quran is going to add to their oppressive state or their sin. It said this Quran is going to add to their loss. If a believer reads this Quran and says, God, I don't know my theology. I'm not going to start my theology by the books of somebody else. I'm going to start my theology by your words, God. God, I don't know what you want in me, in my life. So that doesn't mean I'm going to go to a motivational speaker. That doesn't mean I'm going to go to a life coach and find out what exactly is the purpose of life. Because as soon as I listen to anything from them, they've already placed some sort of barrier and bias on my eyes. God, I want to come to your book first. You speak to me directly. I remember hearing this firsthand. There used to be a time, I used to hear about this. I don't know if any of the elders can confirm. But apparently, we used to live as a community at a time when if your parents saw no intellectual hope in you going through your studies, they would send you to the hawza. I don't think that's the case, at least I hope that's not the case now. But apparently that used to be your get out of jail card. That if there was nothing else left, why don't you just go and study the religion? It seems that there's been a slight paradigm shift, and that if you're not happy with your own life and your business isn't really succeeding, then you become a life coach and tell everybody else how to live their life. And all of a sudden you write a book and you go and you make a conference and a seminar, and all of a sudden you get people jumping up and down and clapping their hands, and now you're able to teach people how to live life. The first thing I remember asking an individual I met, he said, I can 10x your business. I said, great. Okay, what business did you 10x first? He said, I have people and I said, no, your own business. Did you 10x your own business before you come and tell me you can do that to mine? He says, yes, but look what I've done. I've written books and I've got thousands of people inside a theater. This isn't a business to me. You're selling hot air over here. I want to know your business before this. What was it and what did you do to it? He said, well, I kind of ran it into the ground, and so I became a life coach. It doesn't sit well. You need to give me proof that you can do it for yourself before you try and guide me. In the same way, I might take benefit from a life coach, from a business coach, from a motivational speaker, but I have to have the right lenses in order to hear them and listen to them and watch them, right? So before I listen to them, there has to be a filter through which I will take the knowledge that they give me. Because it could be in total contrast to this fitrah that has been created. When that man tells you or the woman tells you for the next 30 years, put your head down, work hard, earn money, I will be able to say, you know what, that doesn't go through this filter, that got blocked. Because that's not what God told me to do. I remember sitting in a gala dinner for an Islamic charity. We're sitting on a round table and all of a sudden somebody turns around and says, oh, did you see that individual who walks in? We all turn around, this man walks in with his wife. Wife is pretty much undressed, and they say, oh, he's such a successful man. Do you know who he is? I said, that, as we spoke about previously, that is poison in the hearts of everybody who hears it and takes it. Don't you dare tell me that that man whose wife walks behind him, scantily dressed, is the definition of success. Tell me he's made money, I accept, but don't tell me that's success. Because as soon as you tell me that's success, and I tell my son, and he tells his wife, and they tell their children, then the whole community has grown on this foundation that success does not matter whether you flaunt the law of God, whether you abide by the law of God, but provided you're financially stable and independent, you're a man or a woman who is considered as one who is successful. The Quran doesn't allow us to do this. One of these individuals who seems to have taken this path of becoming a coach, a life coach, a business coach, whatever you call them. I remember an individual coming to me and saying that I'm going to speak now at a mosque. So why are you going to speak at a mosque? So I'm going to speak at a mosque because they've asked me to come and talk to them, and the talk is talking about success. I said, okay. He said, so I want to tell them about making money and how it will make them successful. So can you tell me which verse in the Quran can I use, please? Can you tell me a hadith that I can use? I said, this is very strange. So instead of this book being a book of guidance that tells you what you should need in your life, you're saying that I have a preconceived notion of truth. I already know what I want and what I want to propagate. I'm just going to try and rubber stamp it with the Quran. And if I come across a verse that doesn't sit well with me, I'm just not going to say that verse. If I come across some advice from the Ahlul Bayt that is in contrast and contradictory to fashion to what I want, it stands against what I want, then I'm just not going to include it in my speech. That tells me, and hopefully all of us here, that if we go to the Quran with a certain bias and lens, like the Quran says, for the believers it's a cure and a source of rahmah. For the disbelievers, even when they read this Quran, the Ahlul Bayt say, Kam min al-Qur'an. How many a reader of the Quran are there, but the Quran curses them? That on the Day of Judgment they say, God, but I read the Quran. Don't you remember Ramadan? Cover to cover, I read it. And the Quran will stand and say, but I curse you today. But I read you. You read me, but you never acted. You didn't come to me for guidance. You came to me for a seal of approval of your actions that you were already doing. That's not what a source and a book of guidance is meant to do. I'm meant to go to it open-hearted. I make myself vulnerable to the Quran. And I tell God, God, I surrender to you. You now guide me to what is best. You might ask that, okay, if I'm going to surrender to God, does that mean I give up my intellect? Does that mean I should stop questioning? If God says do this, I just do it. I don't question anymore. I just become a robot. No. There is no place in Islam, there's no hadith, there's no verse of the Quran that tells man, I want you to surrender your intellect to God. It wouldn't work. You and I need our intellects in order to act. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. You can't have iman except that you accept it through your intellect. You can't do amalul salih until you accept and you do it through your intellect. The first hadith in Al-Kafi is where God speaks to the intellect and says, go back, it goes back. Come forward, it comes forward. Allah says, through you I will reward and through you I will punish. Through the intellect. And that's why you might follow a certain jurist, he might follow a different jurist. He might do his prayers at one time, you might do your prayers at another time. He might do Eid on one day, you might do it Eid on other day, provided it's gone through the intellect. Then on the Day of Judgment, I can tell God, God, I researched, I tried, I've ended up following this individual, this is the rule that I upheld. That's fine. Because there's the intellect which is still being used in this fashion. So what exactly does Allah want from me if not to surrender my intellect? Allah wants that you don't surrender your intellect to Him, but you surrender your will to Him. That through my intellect, I have arrived at the conclusion that He is God. He is worthy to be worshipped. And therefore, I will worship Him and I will question, why am I doing certain actions? And sometimes He will uncover the wisdom to me behind an action. And sometimes He will hide that wisdom for certain actions. If He uncovered the wisdom of every action, then where is the test? Where is الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ? Where is that leap of faith? It's not going to happen if I knew the reason behind every single action. God, why 7 times round the Kaaba? God, why exactly is my left shoulder, not my right shoulder? I don't understand. But God, I know that you exist. I know that وَأَنَّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ الْمُنْتَهَى, I'm coming to you. I know logically, God, that if I've been striving hard in this world, then you will recompense me in the next. You've sent down guides. Therefore, God, if this is what you want, this is what you'll get. I will give you according to your terms and conditions, not mine. When you read the Quran, have you noticed how God has so many stories dotted around the Quran? The longest, what's the longest story in the Quran? Surat Yusuf. The longest story in the Quran, in one section, in one go, is that of Surat Yusuf. The most oft-repeated prophet in the Quran is Musa. His stories are more, by name at least. But with regards to Yusuf, it comes down in one go, 111 verses, all about Yusuf. Even in this story of Yusuf, when you're reading it, the end goal is not to enjoy the suspense, sentence after sentence. It's not to enjoy the fact that what happened next, he got thrown in a well, now what? Now he gets taken out, then what? And you tell the child, it sounds like a great bedtime story. It is a great story. أحسن القصص بما أوهينا إليك هذا القرآن. The best of stories that we've narrated to you in this Quran, but it's for those people who are going to reflect. The final sentence in the Surah of Yusuf 12:111, Allah says, لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قِصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. In his story, in this story of them, are signs and lessons. Ibrah is lessons. That those people who think, they'll be able to take lessons from this. One of the lessons I want to share from Surah Yusuf before I continue in other parts is the end of what happens. Remember what happens to this child, 6 or 8 years old, gets thrown, has a dream first. And his father tells him, don't say this dream to your brothers. They're going to plot. You know how the plot took place. And you know the proof that Yaqub had that Yusuf was still alive, according to a hadith? He sends his children, find, and he says, you can take Yusuf. Yusuf goes to play. They throw him in the well. What's the first thing they say? Uqtulu Yusuf. The first thing blood brothers say about each other is the easiest way to get rid of him, let's kill him. And then somebody else comes into the mix of the brothers and no, let's not kill him, let's just throw him in a well instead. 6-year-old, can you imagine? A 8-year-old being picked up by his brothers, the ones that he's been yearning to go and play with, and they take him and they throw him into a well. When they come back, the first thing they did, they took off his shirt, right? When they come back, they present the shirt to Yaqub, crying and wailing, full of the blood of a wolf. And they say, our father, Yusuf, he was killed and devoured by a wolf. Yaqub takes the shirt and he says, كَانَ ذِئْبًا ذَكِيًّا. It was a very clever wolf. They say, why? He said he managed to kill Yusuf without ripping his shirt. Because they took off the shirt. Doesn't Allah say, وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. You plot and God plots, but in your plot, God will plot so that He unplots your plot. He will ensure that He uses your trickery and decisive nature against yourself. He doesn't have to get in the mix. A miracle doesn't have to occur. He'll just use your finite intellect, oh man, where you think you're going in the right direction, and He will make you slip and the truth will come to surface. At the end of the story, after everything had happened, sold as a slave, worked as a slave, Zulaykha one time, the rest of the women another time, in prison out. Finally, he meets his father. He meets his father. But all this time, has Yusuf been content? Yes. All this time, has he submitted to God's will? Yes. When Yaqub meets Yusuf after years, when his eyesight has gone and now he regains it and he sees Yusuf. Can you imagine a father meeting his child after all these years and embracing him and breaking down with him? One of the first questions Yaqub asks Yusuf. He says, oh Yusuf, tell me what your brothers did to you. I want to hear. A father wants to know what happened to his son. Were you okay in the well, oh my dear child? Did anyone feed you? Was there a day that you went hungry? It's gone past us, but as a father, it's left a hole in my heart. I want to know, oh Yusuf, tell me what your brothers did to you. And Yusuf turns to his father. He says, oh father, let me tell you what Allah did to me. It'll be a very different story. If I tell you what my brothers did to me, that's when I haven't surrendered to God's will. That they threw me into this well. My own brothers. This brother will never forgive those brothers if he doesn't surrender to God's will. This brother will always hold his brothers to account. This brother may not even forgive his father. Father, why did you let me go? This brother will never do anything good to the Aziz and to that entire country of Palestine. Why? Because he'll say that you are the people who locked me inside a prison. Instead, he says, if I tell you how I surrendered to God, that when they threw me in the prison and there was no one to feed me, but Allah sent a caravan to come and pull up that bucket. That when they looked at me, what were their words? They said, Hada ghulam, this is a young child. Ya bushra, hada ghulam, it says in the Quran, good news. They went to get water. The good news was not that we got cold water. The good news is we've picked up a boy, let's sell him. From the perspective of the dunya, yes, look at what my brothers did. They sold me as a slave. From the perspective of surrendering to God, look at how God took care of me. That they sold me to the best of the best. Oh Father, had they not sold me in the way they sold me, I would have been a laborer in the farms. But instead, I worked in the best of palaces. I ate the best of foods. I had the best of clothes. I slept on the best of beds. It's not a perspective change in life. A perspective comes and goes. This is man's heart surrendering in totality to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another thing Yusuf did to show you and me the submission, and we come to the conclusion shortly about how the wisdom of God unfolds if you surrender to God's will. Look at when he goes to prison. Look at how he speaks to God. One of the first talks that we had was about conversing with God. Yesterday somebody asked me, he said, do you mean that we shouldn't ask from God? I said, of course not. The Quran says, "Ud'uni astajib lakum." Call upon me, I'll answer you. Anything you want, ask God. Allah tells Musa, ask me for the salt of your dough, the lace of your sandal. Ask. But there is a way to ask. Right? The child, like I said, has his birthday wish list to God. And just say, God give me, God give me, God give me. That's not a relationship. Ask by all means, but there's a way to ask. Look what Yusuf says. When those ladies pounce upon Yusuf and they tell him, either you come to us or we're going to ensure that the king puts you in prison, Yusuf turns to God and he has a conversation. At that point in time when he's being threatened by either this relationship which will go against God and morality or go to prison, he doesn't stop and he doesn't turn to God. He says, God save me. He doesn't say that. Even at that point in time, he has a conversation with God. Surah Yusuf 12:33, he says, قَالَ رَبِّ السِّجْنُ أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا يَدْعُونَنِي إِلَيْهِ. Oh God, he doesn't say, God send me to prison. That would be incorrect. Why should somebody ask to go to prison? Instead, he says, oh God, prison is preferable to me than what they're asking me to do. If there's only these two options, God, I want to show you that rather than being a free man externally, I would rather be a free man internally and go to prison. Because in prison I will find you, but in going to them I will lose you, God. وَإِلَّا تَصْرِفْ عَنِّي كَيْدَهُنَّ أَصْبُ إِلَيْهِنَّ وَأَكُمْ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ. God, if you don't take me away from their plot, I might incline to it. I might incline, meaning that I have not inclined. I might incline to it, and I might be of those who are ignorant. This is not a man who has surrendered his intellect. Look at the way he's speaking with such eloquence. Rather, he has surrendered his will to God. God, whatever you wish, I surrender. I know that you are going to make what's best for me. I'm going to try and bring it into practice, but just bear with me until I go through one more point in Surah Yusuf, just to show you how the plan of God unfolds if you surrender to Him. When Yusuf is now sent to prison, remember he never asked for prison. It's not that God accepted his dua and sent him to prison. He never asked. He said, God, if these are the two options, then I would prefer prison over immorality. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends him to prison. He goes to prison. In prison, he's still being accused outside, is he not? That this is the man who, according to everybody else, wanted to do something with the wife of the Aziz, and therefore he was sent to prison. Then all of a sudden, just before those two men who are with him are released, what does Yusuf say? Same chapter, 12:42 now. وَقَالَ لِلَّذِي ظَنَّ أَنَّهُ نَاجٍ مِّنْهُمَا. Yusuf turns to that one. You remember there were two in prison, right? One of them is going to die shortly. One of them is going to live. He turns to the one who's going to live. And he says, اذكرني عند ربك. Just make mention of me with your Lord, with the king. Now shaitan comes in. And shaitan thinks that he can put his hand into the plan of God. So now shaitan comes and makes that individual forget the mentioning of Yusuf to this man, to the king. I have read some strange tafasir where people will say that the reason why shaitan made him forget is because Yusuf, instead of asking God, please release me from prison, he was asking this man. And so as a punishment to Yusuf, Allah, through shaitan, makes this individual forget. This is a bias. If you read the Quran with such a lens, you will begin to bring about any conclusion. Stick to what is external. What is external and apparent is that shaitan is the one who made this individual forget, nobody else. Shaitan made that individual forget the mentioning of Yusuf. Now ask yourself why. The Quran is for those who use the intellect. Ask yourself, what would have happened if Yusuf would have come out at this moment in time? If this slave went back to the king and said, King, you've forgotten there's one more person in prison. You've only released two of us. You thought there were two. There's a third. What would the king have done? The king would have said, okay, release him as well. But what would have happened to the reputation of Yusuf? It was still tarnished, was it not? He could never have been a prophet who would have guided people to God, because everybody would still be pointing fingers at him, saying that you were the one who tried to pounce upon the wife of the Aziz. But Yusuf never asks a second time. He asks once in the Quran, and that's it. And he stays in prison. فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. And he remained in prison, and we kept him in prison for many a period, for many years later on. Why? What was the plan of God? God, are you trying to punish Yusuf? God says, if you surrender to me, you will notice how my plan unfolds for you, not for me. I have nothing to benefit. It's you who I wish to benefit. You are my servant. You surrendered to me. Do you remember there comes a time now where this same king has a dream and he can't make sense of it? So he turns to his people in his palace. He says, tell me, what does this mean? Adghathul ahlam. These are strange nightmares that I'm having. Can somebody interpret it for me? Now that individual says, I can get its interpretation for you. Now he runs to prison. He says, oh Yusuf, tell me, what is the interpretation of 7 lean cows devouring 7 fat cows and 7 corns? Tell me, Yusuf, what exactly is it? What would you have done in the position of Yusuf at that time? I know what I would have done. I would have done exactly what I said shouldn't have been done yesterday. Yesterday I said guidance should never be sold off. Yesterday I said that we should never place a barrier to entry into guidance. If it was me in that prison, I would have said, I will tell you the interpretation of the dream after you go and tell the king that I'm still in prison. I'm going to barter with the king here, right? With guidance. Allah shows us in the story of Yusuf, when somebody seeks guidance, even if you have been unjustly dealt with them, guidance is something that you have to give to everyone. When they stood in front of Hussein ibn Ali, ready to kill him, he didn't hold back guidance from them, did he? Even until the last moment, this man was trying to guide them. That was his duty and obligation. You can never place a barrier to entry, let alone a monetary barrier to guide people. Here it's an interpretation of the dream. Yusuf interprets the dream. The man goes back. He interprets the dream for the king. The king says, okay, bring him to me. Now you can barter Yusuf. Now the slave goes back. He says, Yusuf, the king's calling you. He says, now wait. Now there's no more guidance needed. Everything's clear. You've been taken to God. No questions about God, about theology, about religion. Okay, now I'll barter. Now I'm in the driving seat. Now you go back to the king and say, I'm not coming out until he asks the wife of the Aziz what happened. I'm not going to come out until my reputation is clean. You tarnished it, you purify it. And now all of a sudden, she confesses to what she did. Hindsight is 20/20, is it not? But if we all had hindsight before the test begins, there is no test. The test is not knowing the result, but relying on God to get you there. That's what surrendering means. That I know that I love God and He loves me. And if this is what He wants, this is what He'll get. Is it going to make my life difficult? It might. But I know the end result is something that God will be pleased with and that I will be pleased with. If I'm going to bring it into practical terms, and I hope to give you the answer tomorrow. In practical terms, let's bring surrendering to God into our daily life. If I'm going to try and close on a property, I've been searching for a property. I've been trying to buy a house for my family. Finally, I find a house that's checking most of the boxes. So I put in an offer. And now they reject the offer. Now I'm at a crossroads, right? It can go one of two ways. I can up the offer one more time, or I can say, you know what? I made the offer. This is a sign of God, and now I need to surrender and rely on Him. I don't make a second offer. That's one course of action. And you might say, but Yusuf only asked about coming out of prison once. Correct. Yusuf did. But when Zakaria wanted a child in this very same Quran, he says, وَلَمْ أَكُمْ بِدُعَائِكَ رَبِّ الشَّقِيَّ. God, I've never been let down in my prayer to you. That means he's been asking for a child continuously. So that means I should go back and put a greater offer into this house. God, which one do you want? Do you want me to stop and not put an offer? Or do you want me to continue to put an offer? That's practicality now, is it not? This was all theory to an extent. Great, you gave me the story of Yusuf, you told me these principles, now extrapolate it and bring it to life to me and tell me, what does God want when I'm placed with such a situation? What's the answer? Do I turn left or right? Unfortunately, my time is up, so we will discuss this point, inshallah, tomorrow. We conclude by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, in this month of mercy, we ask you to open our eyes, to inspire us to act and make us amongst those who wholeheartedly submit to you, like the submission of Muhammad and Al Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. إلهي وقف السائلون ببابك ولا هذا الفقراء بجنابك ووقفت سفينة المساكين على ساحل بحر جودك وكرمك يرجون الجواز إلى ساحة رحمتك ونعمتك. إلهي إن كنت لا تغفر في هذا الشهر الشريف إلا لمن أخلص لك في صيامه وقيامه، فما للمذنب المقصر إذا غرق في بحر ذنوبه وآثامه. إلهي إن كنت لا ترحم إلا المطيعين فما للعاصين، وإن كنت لا تقبل إلا من العاملين فما للمقصرين. إلهي ربح الصائمون وفاز القائمون ونجا المخلصون، ونحن عبيدك المذنبون، فارحمنا برحمتك وأعتقنا من النار بعفوك يا كريم يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين.